Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's one I've been looking forward to, the sophomore album from BABYMETAL, called Metal Resistance. Have to be honest, even I'm a little bit surprised that I'm covering this band, a group that blew up on the internet in their native country of Japan a few years back, but are only now seeing a real explosion on this side of the Pacific, bound with all the controversy that one would expect with fusing idle J-pop with a hodgepodge of extreme metal. And really, there shouldn't be a controversy about this. I heard about BABYMETAL around the time of their debut back in 2014, and really was not all that surprised or impressed by the novelty of the concept. Oh look, a bunch of cute J-pop singers in front of what would otherwise be synth-driven DDR music, except with a full metal backing band. Cute concept, but on my first few listens, that's all that it seemed to be. Bit of a gimmick and not even a new one. Let's face it, as much as some hardcore metalheads will refuse to admit it, heavy metal can work in a pop-leaning context. As much as some people tend to dump on hair metal or new metal, both genres have standouts that can work. Yes, even new metal. And I've always thought that symphonic metal with a solid hook can play in the same arena, if only because their power ballads are just on a different level compared to most. Hell, I don't even need to point to Nightwish or With Them Temptation or, God help us, Evanescence for proof of that. Disturbed is now notching their biggest ever hit on the Hot 100 with a cover of The Sound of Silence. Now, I will concede that the more extreme metal genres have always been a bit different, don't really fit towards the mainstream pop scene, but I've also heard enough Devin Townsend to know that if the melodic hook is strong enough, you can win over a lot of audiences. It's not like the riffs are that much more abrasive than modern EDM synths or a dubstep breakdown, for instance. As such, my issues with BABYMETAL have always been a little bit different than most, because as much as I dig a lot of the heavier riffs fused with really good pop hooks, there are some real problems with that debut album. For one, many of the songs did try to do way too much, including genre fusions of hip-hop, reggae, and dubstep that did not fit in whatsoever. A more glaring problem came in the lyrics. I get that most people aren't gonna bother translating them, but they do really come across as a tad too cute to really mesh all the way with the metal sound, which didn't help dispel the image of the band being somewhat of a gimmick. Now that said, when I heard that their sophomore album Metal Resistance is taking things a little bit more seriously, with more cohesion, I figured this is probably worth my time. So, was I right? Well, here's the thing. If there's anything that Metal Resistance does that I do appreciate immensely, it's that it clarifies what niche that BABYMETAL can occupy without sounding like a complete gimmick. That said, even though I'd argue this album is more cohesive, very slightly more mature, and ultimately a better album than their self-titled debut, I reckon to many fans it won't quite play off that way because it does come across a little bit less surprising. The novelty isn't quite as there in the same way in the past. But on this record, more than ever, it convinced me that BABYMETAL might have more staying power than people might think, especially if they're played to their strengths, because this is a pretty damn good album. So okay, what are those strengths? Well, obviously a big part of it is the three girls. Immediately distinctive voices that are given plenty of room to breathe in the mix, and yet who have enough strident charisma to play in contrast to the pummeling riffs, the explosive drum work, and the howling array of synths all around them. And while they still play a little bit to the cuteness overload factor that's just not my thing, one thing you do notice is that they can indeed play to a more serious or even aggressive metal backdrop without sounding that far out of place, either on the atmospheric and really quite gorgeous From Dusk Till Dawn, or the symphonic mid or power ballad No Rain, No Rainbow, which sounds really good, to even the Viking metal-esque stomp of Taro. Even if the hook does remind me a little bit of a nursery rhyme cadence, it's a little cute there, but honestly, the song's kinda kick-ass. Now, one thing you will notice going deeper into the track listing is that there are the occasional tracks in English, where you do get the sense that it's a foreign language for the girls in terms of cadence, but it often lands fine enough. But that also means the big excuse for avoiding conversation about the lyrics, that's slipping away, so let's talk about them. And honestly, they fall into two sets for me: the defiantly cute, borderline plastic J-pop side, and the greater embrace of metal cliches, where you could argue that the girls' presence alone does plenty to redeem them. And they score hits and misses in both categories. On the one hand, we have Awadama Fever, which is quite literally a song about bubblegum that seems to bend space and time, and it's one of the best hooks on the entire album, but the song right after that seems to play into being overwhelmed by so many choices, and it doesn't really fit as well with their more aggressive, assertive personas. And yet, on the flip side, when you get a song like Cis Anger blasting all varieties of boys who can't measure up to them, the obnoxiousness doesn't exactly play to any of their strengths. I honestly prefer some of the more cliche metal tracks in terms of content. Well, it's because of the way that BABYMETAL frames the message of how it's okay and a ton of fun to find yourself and grow up through the metal context, presenting it as a unifying force that's all amounts of awesome and powerful. And yeah, since I know I'm a complete sucker for this sort of cheesiness, it tends to connect more often than not and immediately solidify the best direction for BABYMETAL in the future. They're a power metal act, hands down. Maybe dig into some symphonic touches or progressive synths or electronics, but when this record soars on its best songs, it does so in that genre. It plays very well with the pop sensibilities in the melodies, even if you're contrasting with some of the more growl vocals. And you know, it's frustrating that I'm not quite sure the band has completely grasped that yet. Now, don't get me wrong, BABYMETAL has mostly toned down the wild instrumental shifts that kind of hurt their debut in terms of writing more cohesive songs. Somewhat. It doesn't stop the shifts from track to track, where after an opener, it might as well be a cover of a pretty good Dragon Force song, most because there are 2 Dragon Force members on that song. It then shifts gears into a darker, more groove-driven song, with compressed, crunching riffs that feel like something off of a recent Lacuna Coil album. Follow that with a blast of scratchy electronics opening up their 3rd song that might as well come from a Primal Scream track, and you think that cohesion is completely out the window, but this record does settle itself around the midsection, starting with the great solos, guitar and bass, and huge, great drum work is allowed to get some space and supports some good hooks, especially if the production is spacious enough and gives it a lot of room to breathe. Furthermore, it also gives BABYMETAL the chance to tackle experimentation in a way that can still fit within the pop framework, like the Viking metal-inspired Metatalo, or the more ethereal from Dusk Till Dawn. But the distinction here comes in letting the melodies have a lot of room to breathe, or at least balance out against the riffs, which on tracks like Yava or Sis Anger, they feel so overmixed with glitchy electronics and synth that any actual melody is suffocated right at the very back. And that's where we get the 10-card pileup that is Tales of the Destinies, where I can appreciate taking a stab at more technical, progressive song structures, but between the swing piano section and the organ interludes and the multiple time signature changes, plus an attempt to ram 3 distinct hooks at my count through that song, it just feels a little overstuffed for its own damn good. It's a nifty idea, but I'm not quite sure BABYMETAL can believably pull this off at this point, or that it really plays their strength as having that more of that pop framework. Because here's the thing, you could argue that Metal Resistance is a bit of a transitional album as the group begins to mature and craft a unique musical identity that's more than just a gimmick, but I prefer to describe it as more experimental. More than ever, I get the feeling that BABYMETAL have settled into the idea of how their formula can actually work, and as the group grows up and manages to mature, they'll find the metal sounds and textures that work best for their pop style and brand of songwriting. I personally see it as more of a power metal side, but you never know where they're gonna go. And yet, at the same time, they've got a workable formula that's only gotten more refined with some great hooks, and I got no qualms calling this a very good album, getting a solid 7 out of 10 from me. Yeah, the label might have put them together, they're not as authentic, but you know what? They're sticking the landing in terms of good music, and if we get more of that, I'm not gonna complain. So definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I've got the poll up there, so what did you guys think about the album? Like it? Did you hate it? Just leave your scores up there. I'm genuinely curious with a band this controversial. Although, really, are they as controversial as they used to be? I certainly don't think so. Beyond that, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out, I'm gonna try to get through my backlog. It's just piling up like you wouldn't believe. Beyond that, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.